In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, Amen. O heavenly King, Comforter, Spirit of truth, Lord, everywhere present, and fillest all things, treasury of good things, and giver of life, come and dwell in us, and cleanse us from all impurity, and save our souls, O good one. O Theotokos and Virgin, rejoice, Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, for thou hast borne the Saviour of our souls. O holy Hierarch John, pray to God for us. O holy great martyr Euphemia, pray to God for us. O holy Dorotheos of Egypt, and of all saints, pray to God for us. Amen. St. Ludmilla, pray for us. There's a great story of this elder in the desert who is giving a discourse to a bunch of monks. And he's talking about the spiritual life, about virtues, about holy things. And all these monks are just sitting there. And basically they're listening to him talk, and they're beginning to just bow their heads. And they're beginning to bend, and pretty soon you can hear some of them snoring. And the elder sat there and he was just like, "What?" He was really upset. So he said, in the nearby village, there were these big chariots and they had these races, and he started talking about all this. All of a sudden, everyone was awake. And they were completely they were like, oh my goodness, they were like completely bright. And they could hear everything, and they were very, very crisp on every single detail. And he said, yeah, now you see. I explained to them the corruption of this. So anyway, so today we celebrate the exaltation of the Holy Cross. This is one of the major feasts of the Church. We'll talk about the cross. We'll talk about all of that.
Was that yesterday?
Yes, the Feast of the Cross was yesterday. We celebrated a vigil on Monday night, and we celebrated the liturgy yesterday, Tuesday.
So what exactly is Vigil?
Vigil is Vespers and Matins
okay.
served together and prior to a great feast. It's typically how we celebrate a great feast, is by serving a vigil on the eve of it. So the cross is the basis of our salvation. I'm going to start with the Old Testament and talk about this, is that the cross is throughout the Old Testament. It's prefigured throughout the entire Old Testament. If we read Genesis, there's a tree that dominates the garden. It's not the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, it's the tree of life. This is the most important tree, the tree that Adam and Eve eat from, and they remain immortal because they have access to this tree. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil is the tree everyone thinks about because that's the tree that gets them cut off from the tree of life. But the tree of life is at the center of the garden, and they are always partaking of it, and they maintain their immortality through this. This prefigures the cross because the cross is true immortality. Noah's Ark, we talk about this being an image of the Virgin. This is also an image of the cross because this is the wood that saves. It's the wood that saves and gives life. The universal salvation.
Noah's Ark is
yes.
of the Theotokos.
And also the cross. It's both. See, don't get caught up, don't get hung up on a singular frame of mind to think, oh, this symbol must be this or this symbol must be this. No, this is how modern people think. Modern people are actually, forgive me, really dumb. Modern people think everything has to be either literal or it has to be figurative. I'm sorry, it's all. It's figurative, it's allegorical, it's anagogical, which means it's moral. Like every verse of Scripture has at least 4 meanings. And some of the Noetic Fathers say it has 5. And so modern people think the Scripture is either figurative or it's literal. I'm sorry, it's all. Don't ever think otherwise. And so modern scholars tend to be very unsophisticated, actually. I mean, despite their modernity, they're really unsophisticated sometimes. Noah's Ark is, in a sense, another form of the cross. Abraham is going to sacrifice Isaac. This is a kind of symbol of the sacrifice Christ makes. He takes his only son, and he's going to slay him. And Isaac is willing to do this, because Isaac is actually not young. I think Isaac is in his 30s. He's easily willing to die. He's willing to accept the sacrifice. So he's not this little boy. He's someone who could have overpowered Abraham. And so he's willing to actually he allows himself to be bound, and he allows himself to be killed, practically. And he isn't killed, of course. Jacob's blessing, right? There's the moment in which Joseph secures Jacob's blessing of his 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. They are adopted by Jacob. That's why when you talk about the tribes of Israel, there's actually more than 12. There's like 13, right? Because the tribe of Joseph is actually Ephraim and Manasseh. And you also have all these other tribes. And so there's actually 13 tribes. They call them the 12 tribes. Whenever they make a count, there's actually 12. And oftentimes the Levites are not counted because they're the priestly group. So when it comes to the land, there's only 12 tribes because only 12 tribes inherit land. But the Levites are given land. And so there's actually 13 tribes, not 12. And so when Jacob blesses, he holds out his hands like this and blesses the 2 sons in the form of a cross. So the church says this. Moses' staff is the cross. Moses uses his staff. He makes the sign of the cross with his staff and brings the waters down on the Egyptians, right? He separates the waters and he brings the staff down and makes this cross, and the waters come down on the Egyptians and kill them. And he separates them. He uses his staff to separate the waters, and he uses his staff to bring them down again. Moses uses his staff to strike a rock and bring forth water. So Moses' staff gives life. It destroys the enemies of God and also brings life. There's many examples of this. The Passover is a sign of the cross. The blood that is painted over the lintels is the blood that will save us, or the blood of Christ that will actually save us, the blood that pours from the cross. Right, the Jews, as they're going with Moses, they reach this place called Marah because the waters are really bitter there, and they can't drink this water. They're in the desert, they need water, and they reach this oasis that actually isn't an oasis, it has bad water. And so Moses takes this piece of wood and he throws it at God's command into the water, and the water becomes sweet. This is the wood that makes the water sweet. The Jews do a lot of bad stuff. They get attacked by serpents. Moses says to God, "God, what should we do?" And God says, "Make a brazen serpent, a serpent of brass, and put it on a pole and lift it up. And if the people look at it, they will be healed of all these wounds that they have." The brass serpent is the symbol of the serpent, the symbol of what is afflicting them, lifted up. Christ is dead, lifted up upon the cross. Death is destroyed by the cross. Cross is death, is the death being elevated up and being destroyed, ultimately. The brazen serpent is a relic the Jews have. Hezekiah has to destroy this relic later because the Jews are worshiping it as an idol. So even though this brazen serpent, this object is really holy, the Jews start worshiping it, so Hezekiah destroys it. He has to destroy it because it's become an idol. So it's this really awesome relic that the Jews have to get destroyed because they start serving it. Joshua fights against the Amalekites, and Moses is up on this hill watching the battle. And as long as Moses' hands are lifted up, they prevail. When Moses' hands get tired and they begin to go down, they begin to lose. And this is a symbol of the cross. This actually is what it is. Moses' hands represent the cross. And so Moses gets so weak that Aaron has to help him hold up his hands, because Moses can't keep his arms in this position. And so Aaron holds his hands, maybe Miriam also does, or I forget who else helps. But basically, others help Moses, they hold his hands in this position, and Joshua kills all the enemies and they prevail. And the Ark of the Covenant is a form of the cross as well. It's also of the Virgin Mary, but it's also of the cross. Every time they would pick up the Ark of the Covenant, Moses would say, "Let God arise and let his enemies be scattered." We say this prayer when the cross is lifted up. This is our weapon against the enemies. The Ark of the Covenant was also like this. Elisha, this is a kind of interesting one. Elisha the prophet is with the sons of the prophets. There's a miracle that he works where one of the prophets has an axe with an iron head, and the axe head flies off the axe and goes into the Jordan River, I think, and it sinks. And he comes to me and says, "Man of God, that was a borrowed axe. That's not my axe. I borrowed it." And he's freaking out because the axe head is gone. And he just has the staff, the stave. Elijah takes a stick and throws it in the water, and the axe head floats. And so sin, which weighs man down, is lifted up by this wood. Somehow this wood lifts up sin. This is what is done. The Holy Fathers say a lot of things. They say that Daniel is praying to God with upraised hands when he's thrown into the lion's den. This is the form of the cross, and he's saved. Fathers make many mentions of this. And so the cross goes throughout the entire Old Testament. There's all kinds of depictions of it. So the feast that we celebrated today, we're still celebrating it. That's why the cross is still out. That's why I'm still wearing red.
How long do you celebrate the feast?
Well, the Jews will celebrate feasts for an octave. That would be for 8 days. We celebrate many feasts for octaves, but not all. So the feast of the Nativity of the Theotokos was only 5 days because her feast runs right into the Feast of the Cross. And so we have to cut her feast short. So the feast of her birth is only 5 days. The Jews would oftentimes celebrate for 8 days. There are some feasts that we actually that we have them go longer. They go for maybe 9. Right? There are some feasts that go longer and some that go a little bit shorter, but many of them are probably around 8, actually.
So the feast for the
the feast happens on a day, but then the festal period continues.
Got it.
And so if you listen really closely to the Vespers, they're singing about the saints of the day, but they're also singing about the cross still, which means we're still in the festal period of the cross, of this feast. And so if you go and read the Old Testament, the Feast of Passover lasts, I think, 8 days. The Feast of Tabernacles lasts like maybe 10 days. There's the Feast of Trumpets that lasts maybe 10 days, actually. So the Jews actually have these feasts that go on. The feast has its primary day, but it has a continuation. And throughout this time, it's celebrated. And so we also follow the same pattern that comes from the Old Testament.
I was kind of curious about when we let us lift our hands up to the Lord. Is that us making a cross too, or is it just us praying?
So if you see people lift up their hands, they err, actually.
Oh.
The priest alone lifts up both hands, and the deacon lifts up only one. He lifts up his orarium like this.
Okay.
The reason for this is that the priest is supplicating like Moses is before the people. The people cannot make a supplication. Only the priest can, because he's the one that God appoints to do this. Just like Moses is appointed to mediate for the people, just like Christ is the sole mediator. He's the only one who can mediate. The priest is in that same position, and if the bishop was here, then he would. But all the priests would raise their hands, actually, if they were all present, because they're all priests, they're all intercessors. The deacon is not really an intercessor. He's a servant, and so he raises only one hand. This kind of symbolizes that he is in this position between the lay people and the priesthood. He has a part of the priesthood, but he's not a priest, and so he raises one arm as the sign of his authority, but the priest raises both. And that happens a number of times during the liturgy where you see the priest lift up both hands and the deacon will lift up one. The people should not lift up their hands at all in this moment. And if you see people doing this, they do this wrongly.
Okay.
So when it says let us lift up our hearts, it's like the priest is lifting up the people to God. He's the one raising the people up to God. The people should stand there. They should stand piously, is basically what they should do. And they should pray with their hearts uplifted, but not necessarily with their hands. See, the gesture of raising up your hands, as I've just actually gone through, is a gesture that's associated with the hierarchs of God, like Moses and like these figures of authority that are lifting up their hands to God in this powerful way. That's actually something that's associated with power. So that's kind of, so these gestures are not meaningless gestures. They all have tremendous meaning. And so in a lot of churches you may see lay people do things. This is because they're doing this with ignorance. They don't understand why, and they're doing this wrongly. But of course the priest might not know because his back is to them. He's not paying attention to them, he's paying attention to God. So he's not paying attention to what they're doing. And so he may not know that people are doing this. But if they are, then they err in this.
That's good to know. I had one more question.
Yes.
It's just about the serpent itself, because the brazen serpent. I'm just trying to understand. You said it's lifted up in a symbol of.
Well, what happens? So you need to read the scriptures. What happens in the scriptures is that the people are bitten by poisonous snakes. They're being bitten by serpents. They've cursed God. They've once again the Jews have rebelled against God like they do many times. Except this time, the punishment is that these poisonous snakes begin to attack them. Many people are sick and many people are dying, and this is a really bad thing. It's like the area that their camp has become infested with poisonous snakes that are attacking people. And so Moses goes to God and he says, God, help. The people are in this trouble. What should we do? And God says, go and have the craftsman fasten a brazen serpent and put it on a pole. So it's put on a pole. It's put on this tall stick and it's lifted up. And Moses says, and God says, all the men who look at it will be healed. And that's what happens. In a sense, this represents what is killing the people. What is killing the people is the serpents. And so by gazing at the serpent uplifted, the people are healed. When the people gaze at the cross is death, right? You see Christ dead upon the cross. You see Christ bearing the sin of the world. He is sinless. What does St. Paul say? He who knew no sin became sin for us. He who is the life of all things dies. Yeah. By gazing at the cross, you are saved. If you gaze upon it with the eyes of your heart, not with the eyes of your face. If you gaze upon the cross with faith, you are saved. Right. And as I said, this relic was kept. The Jews kept this just like a lot of other things. And later on, in the bad times, they brought it out and began worshiping it. And then that had to be destroyed. Hezekiah had to melt it down and get rid of it, which is too bad. So this feast commemorates the cross. We will talk more about the cross, what the cross does, what it gives to us. So this feast actually celebrates two things. It celebrates the finding of the cross by the mother of St. Constantine, which is St. Helen. Her icon is actually over there. In the church, it's across the way. I can point it out to you as you leave. And it's also celebrating the recapturing of the cross. And I'll explain all of this to you. So basically, St. Constantine the Great, I won't go through his whole life. He has an amazing life that I could spend a long time talking about. But basically, St. Constantine the Great was getting ready to attack the city of Rome. This was a civil war between different factions of Rome. And Constantine was a co-emperor. Like Rome had multiple emperors at this time. They had an emperor of the East, an emperor of the West. They actually had lesser emperors. So the empire was divided into basically 4 sections. 2 eastern sections, 2 western sections. There was 2 Augustuses. These were the 2 primary rulers. And there was 2 Caesars. They were actually lower. So Constantine was one of the western rulers. And so there was a huge civil war between different factions of Rome. And Constantine was marching on Rome to capture it. And before he could get to Rome, he had to cross the Milvian Bridge and face down a much larger enemy. And his enemy was holding the bridge against Constantine. This is very dangerous because he was trying to force his way across the river. And the bridge was also sabotaged by Maxentius, who I guess was the emperor of the time. And Maxentius was wicked. He was a really awful person, depraved, iniquitous man. And Constantine was not a Christian at this time, but his father had been a deep respecter of Christianity. His father would not persecute Christians. He refused to do so. His father was a very, very pious, a very kind of reverent man. He wasn't a Christian, but he respected Christianity a lot. And he basically told his son, don't persecute Christians at all. Do not cause them harm. And so Constantine had this tolerant view of Christianity. And as he's approaching the bridge to have this battle, he sees stars in the sky form a cross. And he is overtaken. And he sees these words, or he hears a voice that says, in this conquer. And he basically says, oh my goodness, like this vision has massive effect upon him. I think he summons a Christian bishop. He asks him what this means. And the bishop says, you should become a Christian and embrace the true faith. And Constantine says, okay. He knows about Christianity. He may not know it very well, but he knows about it. And so he responds to this. And then he says to his army, I want every man to paint a cross on his shield, or the Chi Rho. There's some actual debate about this. The Chi Rho is the letters of Christ,
PX?
Yes. Chi Rho, yeah. The Chi, which is the X, and Rho, which is actually R, but the Chi Rho. And so basically, there's some dispute as to whether they painted the cross or the Chi Rho, or maybe they actually painted both. But they actually some painted the Chi Rho, some painted the cross. It doesn't really matter. Constantine basically goes into battle with his army covered with Christian symbols, and he wins this massive battle. Smashes an army that's much bigger than his with a better position. He wins. And he captures Rome. And he ends the persecutions of Christianity very shortly thereafter. So anyway, his mother converts to Christianity too. And she wants to go and find all the holy things. And so she actually travels to Jerusalem. She wants to see the place where Christ was born. She wants to see Bethlehem. She wants to see everything. And she also wants to find the cross. And so she goes to Jerusalem and looks for the cross. Except Jerusalem has changed a lot. So in the year AD 70, after the death of our Lord Jesus Christ, Jerusalem is destroyed by the Romans completely because the Jews rebel and they cause serious problems, and the Romans destroy it. They burn the temple to the ground and they destroy the city. Then, in the year 135, the Jews revolt again, and the Romans crush them again. And this time Hadrian says, plow the entire city under and build a pagan one on top of it. Get rid of every Jew, put every Jew into chains and take them away, and build a new city. The Romans are very tired of the Jews rebelling. The Jews have revolted so much that the Romans are in a state of absolute exasperation with them. They don't want to deal with them anymore. So he says, destroy the city, flatten it, crush it, and build a pagan city on top of it. Put pagan temples in it. Make it a Greek city, a Greco-Roman city. And they do this. They give it a new name. They get rid of Jerusalem. They don't name it this anymore. They give it a new pagan name, and they create this new city. Except Jews never stop going to the city because this is their place, and so they never cease to go there. So there are always Jews there, despite the Roman attempts to get rid of them. The Jews continue to go to Jerusalem and live there. Basically, St. Helen has to find the cross. An elderly Jewish man tells her where she should look for it, and it's actually underneath a pagan temple. And so she has the pagan temple destroyed, and they search for the cross, and they find three. They find three crosses, and they don't know what to do. And the elderly Jewish man says, these are the three, the two thieves and Christ's. Well, they say, well, we can't tell which one is which. How can we tell which cross is Christ and which one isn't? They have a very sick woman, I think she was a widow, and they also have a dead man who's just died. And they basically take the dead man and the sick woman, and they lay them both down, and they take the three crosses, and they touch them with each one of the three. Two of the crosses do nothing. But when the third cross touches the woman, she's well, and when the third cross touches the dead man, he wakes up, and he's alive again. And they realize that this must be Christ's cross, because only his cross could do this. They also find nails. They find three nails that go along with his cross. And so St. Helen, keeps the horizontal bar of the cross in Jerusalem, and she sends the vertical bar to her son, who is now ruling in Constantinople. And she also gives him three nails, all three of the nails. One of the nails, I don't know how, is lost at sea. It falls off the ship. I don't know how that happened, but it's lost. Constantine takes the two nails and he wears one in his crown, is actually that Christ may always support him and help him. And he takes the other nail and he puts it in the bridle of his horse, that when he goes to war, he will always have Christ with him and he will be victorious, and he actually is, quite often. And then he takes, obviously the vertical bar is taken to Constantinople and is placed in a holy church there. We remember the nails. They were found on March 6th, so the church celebrates on March 6th liturgically the holy nails. On the 13th of September, St. Helen comes back in the year 335. She comes back to Jerusalem and she builds a magnificent church for the resurrection. And that church is consecrated on September 13th. On September 14th, which is the Feast of the Exaltation, they bring out the cross, the vertical bar, the horizontal bar. They bring it out, probably configured as a cross. They bring it out and they parade it before the people, and the people bow down to it in veneration. They chant, Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy, and this is done. And so that's why on the 14th we have the exaltation of the cross, because on this day the cross was brought out in great splendor, and so we've celebrated it from that time forward. Now in the year 615, the Persians conquer Jerusalem, and they kill all the Christians, they slaughter them, and they take the cross as a prize. And this is a massive, distressing event. So Emperor Heraclius, the Byzantine emperor, goes to war with the Persians, defeats them in battle, and recaptures the cross as a spoil of victory. And he brings it to Constantinople, and then he brings it down to Jerusalem, this peace. And as he's walking into Jerusalem, he decides that he will carry the cross himself. And I think he's wearing all kinds of things. He's very splendid. All of a sudden, this is a miraculous thing happens. He's stopped. When he gets to Jerusalem, he's stopped. He's like on the outskirts of Jerusalem, maybe where the Lord is about to enter, with Palm Sunday. He's stopped. He can't move. He cannot do anything. It's like a mystical force is blocking him. So he doesn't know what to do, and he's kind of panicking. And so they bring this holy man, and the emperor says, Holy man, why can't I enter the city? And the holy man says, because you're arrogant, because you're proud, because you're covered in purple, and you're dressed as an arrogant king. Christ went to Jerusalem poor, on a donkey, and he went to Golgotha naked. And so the emperor says, oh, okay. So he strips off everything that he's wearing. I think he wears like a loincloth. He wears something very, very, or he wears like a tattered garment, something very poor, and he carries the cross on his shoulders and goes into the city barefoot. He carries the cross and presents it to the people. They actually bring it to Golgotha. The emperor raises up the cross, and the people fall on their faces and say, Lord have mercy, hundreds and hundreds of times. And they bring the cross back to the church, and it's a massive event. And so this celebration, this feast that we're celebrating, celebrates both The original exaltation of the cross, when Helen built the church, St. Helen, and also when Emperor Heraclius brings it back. And so these two events are historical events that both happened, and they're celebrated in this feast day. At the same time, the cross itself is celebrated theologically. The cross is brought out again twice. It's brought out during Great Lent, in the middle of Lent. So the third Sunday of Great Lent, we bring out the cross very similarly to how we have just done. And it's also kept in the middle of the church and people bow down before it. Why do they do this? To give them strength to get through the rest of Lent. It's also brought out on the first day of August as a procession of the Holy Cross. This connects more with Russia and a procession during war. So some of these historical events become feasts. Like there's historical events where the cross worked a miracle. And so this becomes a feast of the church. And it's commemorated.
Oh, do we know where the sections of the cross are today?
Oh, there's too much. I'm sorry. Like those have been broken into many pieces and taken to many places. I think some of the largest amounts of the cross are on Mount Athos. I think in Jerusalem there's still a large part of the cross kept at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Obviously, the Roman Catholics have parts of it in Rome, and so there's parts of the Holy Cross. There's parts of it everywhere. There's even small splinters that people have been given. There's parts of the cross that go everywhere.
Where did the symbol of the 3-bar cross come from? Is that what the cross was?
So the 3-bar cross is particularly a Russian way of expressing the cross, and the 3 bars represent obviously the center bar represents the actual horizontal bar that Christ's hands were nailed to. The upper part, the top bar, represents the sign that was put over his head by Pilate, the king of the Jews. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That was written in Greek, Hebrew, and Latin. Okay, that's what that represents. The bottom bar represents the footrest. So his feet were put on a rest and nailed to this kind of rest. There was a kind of bar that his feet were placed on, and his feet were nailed to this on another bar that they were then also nailed to this bar. The Russian cross has this 3rd bar tilted. It's tilted up to the right, if you're looking at the cross, to your left. But you have to understand, if you're on the cross, it'll be to the right of the person on the cross. The bar tilted up and down because it's tilted diagonally. The other two are horizontal at a 90-degree angle. The other is kind of maybe at a 45-degree angle. So the tilting up represents the good thief that went to heaven, and the part facing downward represents the thief on the left hand that went to hell, because he blasphemed Christ. That's what that represents. It has a figurative meaning.
Would the 3rd bar be horizontal also, and that one's figurative as well, or is it?
What do you mean?
Like, was it literally diagonal, or would it also have been?
The problem is that there's a dispute. I mean, was there actually a 3rd bar or not? You know what I mean? Many crosses are depicted without a 3rd bar. You know what I mean? The kind of traditional cross that we often see doesn't have a 3rd bar.
That's true.
And so, was this actually a large bar? I don't know.
Again, like
that's maybe that doesn't matter. It's probably more of a figurative statement.
And isn't the papal cross like it has just the top bar and the regular bar? I think there's one like that.
There are many forms of the cross. Many. In fact, in Rome, people try to attack the Pope with this cross that he has that looks satanic because it looks like it's an upside-down cross.
St. Peter's? Or?
Yes, exactly. So St. Peter was crucified upside down, which means his cross is it's flipped, with the horizontal bar being at the bottom instead of being at the top. And so people said, this is a symbol that proves the Pope is satanic. No, this is actually a symbol of St. Peter who was crucified upside down.
It's really annoying.
Right?
What?
Sorry.
It's really annoying when Satanists adopted the upside down cross because they're retarded.
Yeah, and so people have this view, so they try to take this and pay this to the Pope. This is a much older symbol than modern Satanists are.
Well, I was trying to think. We went to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and I wonder where it would have been.
I don't know. Maybe it would have been at the Golgotha.
You said they still have a piece there?
I believe they absolutely do still have a piece of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Like I said, very large portions in Mount Athos at one of the particular monasteries. There might be other parts of the Holy Cross that are actually Mount Athos too, at different monasteries. Obviously, the Vatican has parts of the cross too. I don't know if any remain in Constantinople. It's hard for me to say. There's. I mean, to be honest with you, there are relics of the cross that are so small that they're then put into a hand cross, and so priests can bless people with them, and they're blessing them with the actual cross. Do you know what I mean? That also happens.
In very holy churches like that, where they have relics of a saint or of a holy relic, the belt, for example, where do they keep things this important, where thousands and thousands of people are going to be visiting? Do they have to put it away in a certain place, or do they just keep it very secure?
They may keep it in the altar. They may keep them sometimes, maybe, I mean, I'll be honest with you. I mean, with the Holy Cross, they might be kept in the altar. They might be kept in a kind of vaulted kind of place. Mm-hmm. But oftentimes in churches, the relics are exposed. They're in reliquaries. Like, for example, with the Cathedral of St. John's, relics are not hidden. They're in a special kind of kavukli on a kind of canopied area that you can go to and venerate, and they're just there all the time.
Yeah.
His relics are never moved. I mean, his relics are moved only for what we might call maintenance. Right? They're going to change his vestments. But other than that, the relics aren't really moved. And so the truth is, in many churches you go to, the relics are there. You can have completely incorrupt relics. You can have reliquaries that are just the skull of a saint, in which his face is covered in like a complete gold. I mean, it's like a beautiful ornate golden kind of box that's covered in jewels to honor him. And then the top of his skull is available for people to kiss. That's very common.
In churches, like there's often there's a kind of a crypt, like another room where people will go into with the relics. I know St. Herman's had something like that with St. Herman's relics.
Yes, it depends on the architecture of the church. It depends. Yes, some churches have those. Yeah, but you have to understand there's no one model. So everywhere you go, you'll find different arrangements. That's why there's no categorical model to describe this. But in many churches, the reliquaries are fully exposed. They're in the nave of the church, available for all pilgrims to venerate. Mm-hmm. Something like the Holy Cross, perhaps not, because that's such a special relic that it's probably kept protected, and it will be brought out during feasts and things like this for veneration, and even processed in processions.
I was just thinking, I saw some pictures, I think it's in the book, In the Truth of Our Faith.
Yes.
There's several pretty good pictures in there of some of the reliquaries, like there's the one of St. John Chrysostom, they have you can see the ear.
The ear, yes.
And then they say, I can't remember the monastery, but apparently one of the largest pieces of the cross is in a monastery, but I can't remember. I keep thinking Philadelphia, but that's not it, because but that's the only thing that comes to mind.
Let's talk about the cross itself. What does the cross do? What does it accomplish? So the cross, what does the cross do? The cross is the altar upon which Christ offers himself for the sake of mankind. Who will judge the world? The Father? No. The Father is not going to judge. Christ will judge everything. The Father has given Christ everything because he is both God and he is man. But not only is he just both God and man, but he is also the one who has offered himself for the world. He's also the one through whom the Father made the world. He is the one through whom the Father saves the world. And so therefore he is the one who will judge the world. And the cross is the altar by which he offered himself up for mankind. The cross is literally the tree of life. It is the new life. What is the fruit of this tree? The blood and the flesh of Christ that we consume and eat. Right? This is actually what the cross is. It gives us life. The cross represents everything that is contrary to Satan. The first tree was lost through disobedience. The cross is the tree of obedience. Instead of the tree of disobedience that Adam and Eve ate from, the cross was absolute obedience. Christ was told by the Father, every slap you receive, every spittle you receive, you must receive it. Adam was given only one commandment, don't eat of this tree. Christ was given millions of commandments, and he fulfilled every single one of them to the complete letter. Christ is lifted up. The cross is an exposed reality. That's part of why the Romans did it. It's not, you weren't buried into a hole. You were lifted up high above all the people so they could see you, and you would be naked. You'd be stripped naked. Adam was naked in paradise. Adam became naked through his sins. He lost divine grace. The nakedness of Adam was not necessarily his unclothedness. It was the loss of his divine garment. Christ is lifted up naked and covered in the spittle and blood and shame of this world, and everyone sees him. And so but he at the same time, his hands are stretched open wide to receive the whole world. So Christ's hands are open. They're not closed, they're open, so that he may receive all of mankind. And that's purposeful. Christ says, and when I'm lifted up, I will draw all men to myself. That's actually what he says in the gospel. I will draw all men to myself. And so this is the work that he's accomplishing. So the cross has so many meanings. The cross is the end of death. So death itself is lifted up and it is defeated. Sin is defeated in the flesh of Christ. And obedience is blessed. The disobedience of Adam is exonerated by the obedience of Christ. The law has been kept in completeness. And not only that, it has gone farther than that. And so the cross is literally everything. But of course it is capped by the resurrection. If Christ does not rise, then what has the cross accomplished? Nothing. Men still are dead. Men are not saved from their sins. And they still remain in this place. So the cross frees man from all of these things. Right? The blood of Christ, one drop of Christ's blood is enough to save the whole world. Right? The cross itself is, and he poured out gallons of it to show forth his love for mankind. Basically, man is saved by the cross. The cross is our salvation. But the cross also represents the path of our life. Christ sacrifices himself for mankind. From that point forward, everything becomes sacrifice. The Christian person sacrifices himself. Right? This is how men live. Christ says, take up your cross daily and follow me. The cross becomes the entire way of life.
I know it's like a spiritual, figurative meaning. He means when our Lord says, take up your cross and follow me, but manifesting that through like actually wearing crosses and putting these symbols on us and using that's does that also give us some grace like that?
Absolutely. So first of all, don't say that it's just figurative in a spiritual sense, right? The cross, your cross could be that you die an agonizing death for the sake of Christ. So don't think that your cross is just, don't think that that is just spiritual. All these things, there's a massive interplay. So what Christ does is physical, and it's also spiritual. It's everything. Somehow, on the cross, Christ carries the weight of the whole world's sin upon himself. And yet at the same time, this is an absolutely physical, visceral event. Timothy was there. He went actually to the tomb. He actually visited Christ's tomb and venerated there. And so it's a true physical place. Like everything that happened is physical. Yeah. And yet there's all these dimensions that happen. So does the physical cross actually do anything for you? Absolutely it does. You cannot separate these two realities from each other. Christ has bound them together in himself. He is the invisible God who became man and then died on the cross. And so everything that happens is both physical, historical, but it's also eternal and spiritual, and all these dimensions come together. So there was a Muslim man who had a son, and his son was, of course, born a Muslim. This Muslim young man liked Christianity. He said, I want to become a Christian. But he couldn't find anyone to baptize him, and so he just started to become Christian. And his father was really, really grumpy about this, really upset. In fact, his father was so upset he went to sorcerers and said, cast a spell on my son to make him a Muslim again. The sorcerer said, no problem, man, do that all the time. Let's do it. And so he went to summon demons to do this. The son could not be harmed. And the father was really upset. He paid the sorcerer money for this. He went to the sorcerer and said, why in the world is my son still a Christian? Why is he not a Muslim? And the sorcerer said, well, I'm sorry. The demons come back to me and they tell me that there's fire all around him, that they can't do that. They can't harm him. He has this wood around his neck. And so this Muslim man, despite not even being baptized, had made himself his own wooden cross, put it around his neck and was wearing it. And even just by this, no harm could come to him. But this was also his faith. It wasn't a talisman. It wasn't magic. It was that he had faith in this. He couldn't find anyone to baptize him, but he had faith in this. I put it around his neck, and he was protected. The cross has massive protection, but for those who have faith. Julian the Apostate. Have you ever heard of him? Have you ever heard of Julian the Apostate?
I think I would.
Julian the Apostate was a really, really bad guy. I don't even know if I want to dwell too much on him. But he was an emperor. He was one of the Roman emperors. And so in the 360s, Christianity had pretty much become established, right? It had become established very powerfully. Except this guy named Julian the Apostate became emperor. And he was baptized as a Christian. He said, I'm going to go back to paganism. And he tried to launch this empire-wide campaign to reinstate paganism. He actually wanted to persecute Christians, make paganism great again, do all these things.
Don't make that to happen, man.
So he was going around doing this.
He's the one that got the winter solstice. He's the one that brought all those pagan holidays, I think, after the Christians did.
Very possibly. He actually went to school with St. Basil the Great, St. Gregory the Theologian. They actually knew him in school. And they thought he might become emperor because he was in this position, right? He couldn't be in there like, oh my goodness, like what will happen to the state when he does this? They kind of foresaw that he would be terrible. So I'll tell you some things about him. He was really, really bad. So one time, but he wanted to become emperor, and so he wanted help with this. And so he actually went to the pagan priests. He went to the sorcerers, and he wanted help. And the sorcerer says, I can't do anything for you, but I have friends who can help you. And he met Satan, the devil, these spirits that he could summon. He said, let's go to them. But you cannot do Christian things, because you'll drive them away. Don't do those things. And Julian the Apostate said, of course, I don't want to do those things. And so they went to this cemetery. I don't know where they went. They went to this place where these spirits were. And the pagan priests began to speak the incantations that would invoke their presence. And he did this, and they, sure enough, the demons appeared. They came. And Julian the Apostate was so freaked out that he made the sign of the cross. And the demons immediately left. And the pagan priest said, I told you cannot do those things. You cannot do this. You're going to come and do business with me. And Julian said, well, what can I do next? Go kill a baby and bring me the baby's body. And then I can get you what you need. And so Julian the Apostate murdered an infant and brought a dead infant to the pagan priest, and the demons were once again summoned. And this time Julian the Apostate reflexively made the sign of the cross and didn't help him anymore, because he had stained himself with blood and had become absolutely wicked and evil. And actually Julian the Apostate went so bad, he was so bad that he created this bath of blood. He wanted to undo his baptism. I don't know if it was the blood of humans, the blood of animals, I don't know what it was. It was the most disgusting thing. And he was bathed in it 3 times so that he could undo his baptism. He could retroactively take off his baptism somehow. He was insane, and he died. He died. It was, and came to nothing. My point being is simply that he ruled for 2 years. It was like a couple of years. He ended in it, and the world could care less. But my point simply is that even he made the sign of the cross in this moment, and it brought about this complete departure of all these evil things. The cross is made with faith. It has ultimate power. It has complete power. So there's no difference between making the sign of the cross and the cross of Christ. You actually bind the cross of Christ directly to yourself. That's when you venerate a piece of metal, like we have the cross that's on display. It's the same as an iconographic reality. You touch this, you're touching the cross of Christ. The fullness of Christ's power is given to this cross. When the priest has a blessing cross, which in the Orthodox Church we use quite often, this is like being blessed by Christ. So if the blessing cross is used, people should make the sign of the cross in reverence for the cross, and they should bow. But the cross has this tremendous power, and so there's no separation. It's iconographic. If we fashion crosses, we are binding this cross, this cross we make, whether it's a neck cross, whether it's a pectoral cross for a priest, whether it's the hand cross, doesn't matter. It's bound to Christ's cross itself by faith, and it wields the very same power. When people make the sign of the cross over themselves, they should actually do this in an Orthodox manner. They should actually take their 3 fingers and make the Holy Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and the 2 natures of Christ. And this is the entire gospel. The Trinity, this is the 2 premier dogmas of Christianity, the Trinity and the Incarnation. And then you make the sign of the cross over yourself. And what is this and what has happened? You have actually performed the whole gospel. The Trinity, the Incarnation, and the sacrifice of Christ. In this one event, with this one action, you have basically brought the entire reality of Christianity upon yourself, as well as all the sufferings of Christ, all his love, everything. So when you make the sign of the cross, it's not a small thing. It's that all the sufferings, you should realize when you do this, all the sufferings of Christ, you just painted over yourself. It's like the Passover. That's why I said earlier, the Passover is one of these iterations of the cross in early times. When the Jews painted the lintels of their doors with blood, the destroyer passed over. It's the same as with the cross. You've just painted yourself with Christ. If you do this with faith and not reflexively, if you do it with meaning, you have such power, you have such defense, you don't even know. Now, why do we go to the right? Because this is where blessing always begins. So in the Orthodox Church, I wear my wedding ring in my right hand. So like sometimes people come and kiss my left hand when I'm handing on Hedron, or when I'm holding the cross, or they'll kiss the cross and go to kiss my left hand. The Jews actually kiss the left hand. We always kiss the right hand. The right hand is the right hand of power. So when a priest blesses, it seems like he's blessing opposite to you, but what I'm actually doing is I'm blessing the right and going to the left. So when I bless myself, I do the same thing, except I go to the right, to my right, and then I go to my left. When I'm blessing you, I go the opposite. I go to your right, and then to your left. So we always go to the right. Why? Because we want to be on the right hand of God. We want to have his power. The right hand is always the power of blessing. Christ is called the right hand. Right? We want to be seated at the right hand with him. Right? We don't want to be sent to the left with the goats. We want to go with the sheep on the right side. And so there's many iterations throughout the scriptures about the right hand. I'm not sure why in the West people go to the left first, but maybe some people have actually said...
They used to do right. They switched.
Yeah, that's true. There's even popes that have said this. And I think probably what some people...
They did the 5 wounds of Christ instead of the Trinity.
Right.
I think originally you guys used to do it the 2 fingers, I think.
Yes, in the older days we would actually make the sign of the cross like this. We would make it, but this is the same actually as this. And so actually if you think about it, these are actually the same realities.
No.
It's simply that the church decided to move to this symbol. I'm not sure why, actually. But this caused a huge issue in Russia. I guess the Russians were the last to move from this to this. But it doesn't matter. This is the sign of the cross. This is how we perform it. You know, we go from the top, we go all the way down to the navel, and then we go right shoulder, left shoulder.
Oh, if I may interject, Mexicans, and sometimes Mexico, they do Christ on the cross and the Trinity. Some of them do. I've seen some Mexicans do that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
That's the other one I've seen.
Interesting.
Forgive me, I didn't mean to insinuate that the cross was just symbolic. I was just trying to understand the connection between our crosses and other crosses and how that all comes back to our Lord.
It's absolute. It's an absolute connection. The power is absolute, but by faith.
Yeah.
Do you have faith or not?
Yeah.
Because the problem is that the part about faith would then turn this into magic. And see, what is magic? Magic is this idea that if I speak some incantation, something will happen. That's not Christianity. Christianity has a living, dynamic reality with God. When I was in Romania, we went to see these incorrupt relics. Like, I can't speak Romanian. My wife is there. As we're in line to venerate this holy man who's tortured by the communists, we hear these women talking. Like, my wife understands them. I don't. My wife says, she said, these women are saying that if you visit this man's relics 9 times, then magic will start to happen. It's like, I'm sorry, like, you just turned him, he's a holy man, he's a saint, like, and you're treating him like he's some kind of thing. Like, he's like, it sounds like, yeah, if I rub this thing 3 times, then, like, things will happen. It's like, no, go and talk to him, go kiss him, and go venerate him. He's a person. He's not a thing. He's not an occultic object, right? And so that's what you have to be careful of. Like, relics are holy. I mean, I'm going to be honest with you, like St. Jacobos, he's a great saint in Greece who was just canonized. He would see this man named St. John the Russian. He's another saint. I don't have time to explain all these saints to you. I wish I could because they're amazing. But St. John the Russian is immaculately incorrupt too. And he's in this, this reliquary in this very famous church. St. John the Russian is very famous. He was a Russian soldier that was taken by the Muslims as slaves to Turkey, and he became a massive saint. I'll give you one example of one of his miracles. He was a slave of this Muslim man. The Muslim man went on the Hajj to Mecca. St. John the Russian was his slave. And yet St. John the Russian said, I hope my master is doing well in Mecca. We're cooking tonight at his house. We're cooking his favorite meal. He said, oh Lord, bring some food to my master in Mecca. Well, his master was in Mecca. And his master went back to the inn in Mecca where he was staying. And all of a sudden this plate of food was on his desk. And it was his family's cookware. His family's, plate. And I think he brought it back with him. And so God, an angel carried this all the way to Mecca. to give, at the request of St. John. So this is a very interesting story. Anyway, St. John dies among the Turks, the Greeks. When there's a population exchange, they take his relics back to Greece. Saint Iakovos, who would watch his body, he would actually stand next to the reliquary while people would venerate, and he would watch. And he could spiritually from his heart see that the saint would turn away from some people. He would turn away from them, like he would reject them. And others he would turn towards them. Why? Because some approached him faithlessly, and some approached him with a lot of faith and a lot of reverence, and they wanted to ask him something. And he would turn towards them with absolute love. And others he would turn away from, because they had no faith at all. And so these things cannot be seen as being mere magic. If they're mere magic, then what is the dynamic of God? Is it any power? Is it real power anymore, or is it simply this kind of weird occultic reality? We don't really have this view. And so there are people who make the sign of the cross carelessly. They make it without belief. They make it without reverence. They make it without faith, without forethought. They kind of just do it. The same is true of the Jesus prayer. People will say the Jesus prayer all the time. They'll mumble it without believing it, without actually meaning it, without faithfully reciting it with devotion. If they do this, they're just babbling, and nothing will come of them. Whereas if they say this with faith, great things will happen for them. And that's true of all prayers, but you have to actually have faith, right? If you wear a cross with faith, it's a great thing. Like, forgive me, there's a lot of people who wear crosses as jewelry, and they have no real belief in its power. They don't care. Will it protect them? Probably not, because they have no reverence for it. They don't care for it. They don't wear it as a symbol of meaning. It's just a thing.
It's become trendy now for people to wear crosses or crosses earrings.
Yes.
I've seen it a lot.
Yeah. So people have these things, but it doesn't mean that they reverence what they're wearing. It doesn't mean this necessarily. So the cross has massive power. You should realize when you make the sign of the cross with faith, Christ is there. It's as if he's there in all of his power. St. Simeon, the new theologian, one of our greatest saints, says that if Christians only knew the power of the cross, they would not suffer so much from the devil at all. If they only knew how much power they have. But Christians don't know this power. And so they don't, when they're under extreme temptation, if they had real faith, they would escape so many things. But they don't. So they don't live by the power of the cross. They don't. They don't have faith. And they don't make the sign of the cross with faith. And the sign of the cross has been made from the most ancient of times. In the ancient times, there probably was different traditions, right? Local traditions about how people made the sign of the cross, whether it's with open palms or whether it's, in one form or another. But in the East, it became established this way, probably moving from this. In fact, St. Nicodemos says this is how the apostles made it. This is what his opinion was. But the church has come to this. We make it actually this way.
Was that why it was such a point of contention with the old believers?
Yeah, the old believers said, we will never change. We'll never do this. We won't obey the church. We'll just obey what we think. And they followed this. And ultimately, this was one of the main points of contention. Now, when the old believers, there was even a split among them over this. Because this should be the divine nature, and the human nature is lower.
But for them, was it an apostolic thing that they were trying to retain, or is it just their pride?
Well, ultimately, it was their pride.
Because I know the church.
It ultimately was their pride because they didn't follow no bishops followed them. They followed no one. They followed their own will.
First time I heard this was Brother Ambrose used to be a Mount Angel, and the monks over there said they kept him just to keep people from converting. But he was an interesting guy. He was an old believer, and first time I asked him, I said, "How come you guys broke away from the Catholic Church?" He goes, "It's you guys that broke away from us." I'm like, "What?" And it just had this profound effect. And I go, "So what is the old believers?" And he talked about the finger thing, and I was like, and it just astounded me for all these years. But I find my fingers easier to do. They're old believer. I kind of do half break because for some reason my fingers get sore. They get like aches. But I try.
Yeah.
Do they have their own bishops?
I don't know. There's different factions of the believers. That probably is not.
Yeah.
We're moving away from the cross.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No,
I just
no.
found it was interesting. This is my
How about the Jerusalem cross?
I mean,
It's more like a square with several
that's
crosses.
actually the Crusader cross.
The
That
Crusader cross.
represents Jerusalem and the four main Crusader nations, because the Crusader cross typically has four other crosses with it,
Yeah.
and that represents England, France, Spain. No, I don't know if it's Spain, Italy, and Germany, I think, because they supplied the Crusaders. Spain had its own crusade against the Muslims that were in Spain. So a lot of Spanish knights would fight in Spain against Muslims that were in their own area. They didn't necessarily go to Jerusalem. Some of them did, but Spain was already at war with Muslims in its own territory.
So is that different than the Jerusalem cross? They're both.
I think the
they're
truth of the
called-
matter is that what we call the Jerusalem cross today, I think actually comes from the Crusaders. It comes from that time.
So this would be the Crusader cross, or?
Yes, actually, that comes from that is actually connected to the Crusader period. I think that's actually where that cross actually comes from.
It's easy to the Pope, the bent cross, that was considered heretical cross by heretics. And then the Vatican II sect used, I was just listening to a podcast on that.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know, like you said, I don't know so much if it's the symbol or if it's the actual meaning, because the cross was a symbol of terror. and then it turned into a symbol of redemption. You know.
So what are you talking about with the cross that heretics thought was wrong?
It goes all the way back to I forget, with some pagan ritual, or I forget the group that they were practicing dark magic, and they'd use a bent cross as in the form of
broken cross.
Broken cross, and that's apparently that bent or broken cross is what people were up in arms with Francis and John Paul II used. I always wondered, some people, the upside down cross is the cross of St. Peter. I think a lot of it isn't it supposed to be more, it's more of your faith than the actual symbol. But I always like the Orthodox cross. It's just something, I don't know, I can't explain it.
Tell with the 3-bar cross.
There's something, there's just something, it seems odd to me, but I think a lot of it's how you perceive it. Is what and that's what I'm catching you're saying.
Well, I think the thing about you're talking about the cross of St. Peter, it's like, if the Pope is actually using the cross of St. Peter to represent Peter being crucified upside down, and there's something satanic about this is how he was crucified.
Yeah.
But if some Satanist does this to mock the cross, then obviously he's committing blasphemy.
Right, so it's about your thinking of it.
Right.
Yeah. It's a little bit in between. Sounds like there is mystery to it.
With the old believers and us, this actually became, like in Russia, this actually became kind of like intense, because this or this came to be a question of like obedience to the church. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so like there was even a time where Saint Seraphim, one of our great saints, like this woman came to him, or this person came to him, and I think this person had relatives that were old believers, and she said to Saint Seraphim, Saint Seraphim said to her, how did your, the easiest way to have this conversation was simply said, how did your relatives make the sign of the cross? She said like this, and he said, then they are bound. Because by doing this they've rebelled against the church. I mean, look, the rest of the Orthodox world, this didn't really happen because this just in Greece, like there was no issue. Like this was the way it was in all the other places it was. But in Russia, this was a huge thing. Like this became a big thing. They said, "You're changing the sign of the cross. Is that even the sign of the cross anymore?" And they got really, really upset. This became a serious matter. So in Russia, this issue has continued between us and the old believers, between the Russians and the old believers. Now the Russians are doing everything they can to simply heal this, and so that I think they've made a lot of progress in rectifying it. But some of the old believers are so intense that they will break with each other over this.
Yeah, I've never seen that before.
And so like this, they're saying, oh no, the original was this, oh no, the original was this. Now, when the priest blesses with the initials of Christ, ICXC. So he forms his hands into the initials of ICXC, which is Christ's initials. And then he blesses basically in the name of Christ. So when the priest blesses you like this, don't make the sign of the cross. The reason being is that you don't add to Christ's blessing. So if you're being blessed, don't cross yourself, because it's almost like you're trying to add your own blessing to the blessing of Christ that Christ is giving to you. The reason you make the sign of the cross when the cross is used is out of reverence for the cross. Or if you see the chalice being used, people should make the sign of the cross. Or if the gospel is used, then people should make the sign of the cross out of reverence for the gospel. So when you make the sign of the cross and you approach an icon, what you're doing is you're saying, I'm unworthy to touch the icon. The icon is holy. This is a saint. This is the mother of God. This is Christ. I'm unworthy to even touch this. Because if I touch this icon, then what I do will go to it. But for the sake of the cross and what Christ did in it, let me come close. So what you're doing is you're saying, I'm a sinful man, but for the sake of what Christ did, let me come near. And then you venerate. And so that's why people bow and they make this veneration, because they're humbling themselves and they're saying, oh, for the sake of Christ, may I venerate you. And then you venerate. So the cross is both, is the blessing of God, and it's also protection. It's both. Don't make the sign of the cross when you're coming to receive Holy Communion, though. The reason is practical. People bump the chalice and have knocked it by doing this. People are actually taught, don't make the sign of the cross when you're coming to receive communion. Don't do that. If you're way back, yeah, that's fine. But when you get close to the chalice, do not do that. So that's actually why tradition is that you actually will oftentimes cover yourself like this, or actually some people even do this, where they'll put the left hand over to block the right hand from trying to make this gesture, which might hit the chalice and knock it over. And it's not just talk. I know a priest who had it happen. He actually had the chalice upended all over him. And it was awful. He had to burn his vestments. It was awful. It wasn't sacrilege in the sense the person meant to do this, but it was a horrendous accident. It was a terrible.
What do you even do in that situation?
You burn a lot of things, right? We have to burn a lot of things. Whatever the blood of Christ comes in contact with, we burn. That we don't have continuous use for. Vestments are very labor intensive, and they're also holy. And so if a small amount of blood lands on vestments, then we are allowed to actually to blot it. That's where we will try to pull the blood out of the vestments into another cloth. That will be burned. But if a vestment is upended, the chalice is upended, no, I'm sorry, we burn the vestments. The vestments have become completely saturated with Christ's blood. We must burn them.
I had to burn somebody's jacket once.
We have to burn, that's so. Infants, the most common thing is if an infant spits up and spits blood or spits particles of the body over clothing, that gets burned. So there are times in which this happens. The communion cloths, there's different ways people do this. Honestly, the communion cloths represent something that has continuous contact with Christ, and so there actually are ways that people will wash these. in a very reverent way. Some priests just keep them until they get really soiled and then they will burn them. There's different patterns about how this works. Communion cloths are used differently. Different priests will do different things with them. But vestments, depending upon the spill, you may be able to retain the vestment if you can blot it out. But oftentimes, if it's severe, you have to burn it.
Prayers you have to read or anything, or just treat of reverence?
Yeah, not necessarily. There isn't necessarily a service for destroying vestments. If holy blood hits the floor, technically speaking, we would actually have to take a sander. First of all, we would soak up anything that has fallen on the ground. And actually the priest should lick it off the ground, is actually what he should do. We will take a sander and we would actually sand the area that it has landed on. And all those particles that we have sanded would then be burned and destroyed to make sure that nothing that has come into contact with it will remain. If a particle lands on the ground, this is a little bit different. Obviously that would happen in the altar because there are no particles outside because everything is saturated in the blood that has gone into the chalice. But if the priest was fracturing the lamb and a particle flew off and landed, this would be taken off the floor and consumed. Because it is a particle, a solid reality, we might not necessarily burn the floor. If it has landed on the floor, we might not burn the floor. Obviously we would want to make sure no residual particles remain. And of course this is a terrible thing if a particle falls. It's a dreadful, dreadful thing. Can it happen? Of course, it can definitely happen. But it's not good. It's a very, very terrible thing. But with blood soaks into things. And so therefore that's why blood leads to much more destruction of things, because the blood will soak into anything that it touches, especially fabric, whatever it may go into, it will saturate it. In Russia, one time St. John of Kronchev, my patron saint, was attacked by a nihilist, like a kind of atheistic student. Attacked him actually when he was serving communion and punched him in the side of the head. And actually his ear, he went deaf in the ear that he was punched. And he spilled the chalice on the ground. And actually the Russians took these. This was a naval cathedral, so it was near the ocean. They of course cleaned up everything. They licked up everything. They consumed everything. They washed everything with cloths that they then burned. But then they took the stones out of the church's floor and threw them into the ocean, so they would not be profaned. Extreme lengths are taken. So how do we end up on this topic? What are there?
Making the cross before the chalice.
Yes, don't make the sign of the cross before the chalice. Don't do that. Because you can have the best of intentions, but you could cause the worst thing in the world. It's better to not do this.
If you're behind the person that's communing, is that okay? If you have enough space, or just refrain from doing it?
You should probably refrain. You should probably make it a ways before. Make it as you're getting into line. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because otherwise you might get used to making gestures. And you don't actually want to be in that habit. That's why some people actually, when they form their hands, they cross their hands, they will actually put their left hand over their right to make sure the right can't do what it feels like it should do. It's just a precaution. It's not irreverent. It's just a precaution. Because many people have made this mistake many times.
What exactly the title, the exaltation of the cross, like the title of that feast?
The exaltation, so the exaltation goes back, like I said, to St. Helen consecrates this huge church for the resurrection. The next day they bring out the cross and they exalt it. They lift it up in front of the people so the people can bow down before it. So the exaltation is the lifting up, the reverencing, the honoring of the cross. That's what it means.
Okay.
And so this is done practically in the church when we bring out the cross. Actually, Joe stayed all the way to the end, so he saw everything, right? The priest carries the cross out at the end of the vigil. He actually holds it above his head. And there's a part where he says, wisdom, stand upright, and then he carries the cross all the way down to the center of the church, places it there, and then he bows down before it. The exaltation is this moment in which it is raised up. Now, if you go to a monastery or to a full cathedral, they will actually greatly increase this service. And so the priest will be lifting up the cross and lowering it, and the people will chant Lord have mercy 100 times. And people will get on the ground. And they'll do this 5 times. They'll raise it and lower it. And so that is the exaltation in a totally grand sense. In most parish churches, though, we do not do that necessarily long service. That's mostly for monasteries and in large cathedrals. In most parishes, that part is not quite done always. But the exaltation is the lifting up, the presenting. The cross is presented and lifted up. Okay. And so this exaltation is done, like I told you, it's done also during Lent. We also bring the cross out in the middle of Great Lent. On the 3rd Sunday is the Sunday of the Cross. And actually the service for this is not that much different. We do prostrations before the cross. We prostrate before the cross even on Sundays. Doesn't matter. The Sunday of the cross, we prostrate on it. If this feast of the exaltation falls on a Sunday, we still prostrate before the cross on Sunday, and this is not changed. So the cross, in a sense, trumps the rule for Sunday. It actually trumps it.
That's one of the times that happens, right? Is like, I know the exaltation of the cross on a Sunday, and then there's a few other instances where you can prostrate on Sundays.
Yeah.
What are those again?
Pentecost?
Yeah, the kneeling prayers of Pentecost. But that actually, if you want to be technical, that happens after Vespers. So that actually happens on Monday.
I remember I remember this last Feast of Pentecost was on a Sunday.
It was, but we served Vespers right after the liturgy in order for everyone to be present. So it's fine. Don't worry about it.
I'm trying to remember what you said earlier when you were talking about we have the actual historical event and then the meaning behind the historical event and then the lifting up. Christ says he has to be, he says that in the Gospels many times.
Yeah.
How he has to be lifted up. And then you said so many things, I can't remember everything about.
Oh, you can wait for the CD to come out.
Yeah. So about how he'd be lifted up so that so that men would draw near to him.
That he would draw all men to himself.
Right.
If I'm lifted up, I will draw all men to myself. He says this many times. As the brazen serpent was lifted up by Moses, so the Son of Man must also be lifted up. He actually says that to Nicodemus, I think, in John 3. He compares himself to the brazen serpent. He actually makes this direct comparison between the Son of Man and the brazen serpent.
Oh, okay.
The brazen serpent is not something that is left for us to speculate and dig out. He actually makes that direct connection. He makes it directly between the Son of Man and the serpent that Moses made. So yes, in many places he talks about being lifted up.
Risen cross. I've heard that's heretical. When you see some churches, I see some of the new Catholic churches have Christ look like he's risen on the cross. Heard people say that's heretical. Is that true at all? Or you hear a lot of things. You just kind of.
What do you mean by that?
He's like he's risen. He's like risen. He's on the cross, but he's risen. I've heard that was
or is it almost like he has the form of the cross without the bars? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, like he's risen. I've heard that, and I've always, never looked it up, and I just thought it was interesting. I never heard that. I've seen St. Jude's by my house has one.
And that's their main altarpiece?
It's out there. Actually have their crucifix like outside the church, so like they use that nature as their church.
So this is so what you're talking about, this
the main cross, but it has like Christ risen instead of being a crucified cross. It looks like he's risen.
I don't know what you mean by risen.
He's
not like the cross?
Risen.
No.
Instead of the crucified Christ.
No. What it shows is it shows him. It shows it's him dressed as the resurrection, but his hands are extended. Yeah. It's almost like he's forming a posture as if he's on the cross, but he's resurrected. Do you know what I mean? And so his bodily form seems like he's on the cross, but he's actually, so instead of having his hands nailed, maybe his hands are like kind of like this. And this, okay. So he looks. It's almost like he's mirroring the cross, but instead he's actually resurrected. So the bars are not present. He's not nailed to anything. He's just forming a cross, but in this resurrectional pose.
Okay.
So I don't know if there was something in the East that came from the Novus Order, if that is heretical.
The problem with this is that our gospel book, for example, has two images. On the front of the gospel book there's a resurrectional image, and there's also a Christ being nailed to the cross image. So both of them are present. The problem, I think, especially in the Catholic conception, is that if the altar, the cross, the sacrifice, is a kind of an odd thing to do, because the cross represents, Christ being nailed to the cross is the sacrifice being killed. If you have that above the altar, if you don't have that above the altar, then what are you doing? You know what I mean? For us, we're actually much more resurrectional than the Roman Catholics are, because the Roman Catholics, I don't think they hold Sunday as being, I don't think they treat every Sunday as being Easter. For us, every Sunday really is.
They count that as a day, as you guys don't count it. We don't count it as part of the Lent. I remember that. Sunday ain't counted as part of the 40-day fast. They count it, if I'm correct.
Right. We do fast on Sunday in the sense that we avoid dairy products and meat, but we still use wine and oil, which for us is not really fasting. The images of the resurrection, you'll see them throughout the church. But we don't really have this image that you're talking about, where we try to artistically depict this. And I'm not sure that that's such a great thing, because the reality is that the cross is the cross, the resurrection is the resurrection. We should show both of these images appropriately.
That's what I kind of thought too. I see a lot of stuff in the Novus Order. Just
some of it is
bizarre.
Some of it is just creativity.
Really bizarre.
It's just attempts to be creative and to do interesting things and some of this stuff. But the problem is every single thing that is done has a symbolic meaning and symbolic value. And the problem is we should not trample on these ancient values that we've been given. And so every symbol, every image has a purpose. And so oftentimes modern people have no idea what they do. So I'll give you an example. The Holy Family that the Roman Catholics oftentimes depict, we hate the way that they depict it. Because there's
the nativity scene?
Well, kind of, because the problem is this. When you actually study true iconography and you depict Joseph always has a posture towards Christ that is a little bit standoffish. The reason why is that he's not his father. Oh. So you never see Joseph putting his arms around Christ, because he's not his father. He's not his father. The mother of God is his mother, though. And so you see the mother of God holding Christ. But the way we depict Joseph, so Joseph is never going to put his arm around the Virgin Mary either, because, they're espoused, but he didn't have a union with her to produce Christ.
The Holy Spirit did.
Right. And so the problem is that we actually, so for example, there are modern Orthodox iconographers they probably do not know the tradition, and so they're producing icons that are perhaps closer to Roman Catholic standards with regard to St. Joseph and things like this, that we would say, this actually is, if we follow the true patterns of iconography, that's actually a heretical icon. It's wrong. Because we want to be as far as possible from insinuating that Joseph has made any actions with the Virgin Mary. He never has.
I catch you, yeah.
Even the way we depict Christ and Joseph and the Mother of God follows very special guidelines that have to be followed. And so the old rules of iconography were very strict and very rigorous. Like, you have to do this, this, and this. In fact, they even had guidelines for how an iconographer should paint a saint for which he doesn't know the physical description. Like what if someone says, come and paint Saint, some hierarch, and you don't know, you've never heard of it, there is no description of him. We don't know how to paint him. Like St. John Chrysostom, we actually know very well what he looked like. St. Basil the Great's very clear.
He's got a pretty big forehead.
St. Nicholas, St. Nicholas is the saint. But the problem is, what if someone says, well, paint this hierarch? I've never heard of him. Like, I mean, I know he's a saint, but I have no idea what he looks like. Well, there were guidelines that were canonical guidelines for how you paint a hierarch if you do not know his physical description.
Do you think there's still guidelines like that? Because
All the guidelines still exist.
Yeah.
The problem has been the commercialization of iconography, in which you have many people that are now producing icons that should never produce icons. In fact, the real holy iconographers, some people would kiss the hands of iconographers because they say, you are depicting God for us. You're depicting the gospel. You're depicting holy mysteries for us. There was really holy iconographers. Like in Romania, there was an iconographer that was painting. And he said, as soon as food touches my lips, I don't paint anymore for that day. I paint only fasting. I paint only under ascetical guidelines. If as soon as I touch food, I don't paint anymore for that day. Which means if he paints into the afternoon, it means he's been fasting all day and painting. Because this is a spiritual work. It's a spiritual act.
We have an interesting iconographer.
Yeah. I mean, like iconography contains, there's some really strict guidelines to how it should be done. And so a lot of modern iconographers, I don't know if they even know these rules, and I'm not sure if they even seek to know. And that's unfortunate. But if you go to the old country, they have many, many, many very fine traditional iconographers in all the old countries.
Sorry.
In Russia and Romania and a lot of these countries, very traditional icons are beginning to come back in a very, very intensive way.
Yeah, I heard, like, for example, you never see the Mother of God kneeling down in front of Gabriel on the Annunciation. Mm-hmm. And you'll see that in some of the depictions in the Romans, and I hear that's completely heretical. She's the Mother of God, the Queen. And I've heard that it's very rigorous, and like her halo, if I remember, is supposed to always be the biggest. Of any saints, always supposed to be bigger.
You're right, that's absolutely true. She never kneels to the angel. Why would she kneel to what is lesser? She doesn't do this.
I was just wondering about the guidelines thing because I sometimes see icons of pretty obscure saints, and I'm wondering how they found out about that. So they must still be following a guideline like that, at least.
Yes, I mean, I'm going to be honest with you. When you look at hierarchs, especially hierarchs that are obscure, they all look similar. Why? Because the guidelines for a hierarch all look the same. Because there's a way to do it. Or an ascetic. Like, how many holy monks do we have? Like, many.
Yeah,
do we have individualized descriptions for all of them? No. So today we celebrate St. Euphemia. St. Euphemia appeared to St. Paisios personally. And so he would describe what she looked like to people. He would say that she appeared to me. In fact, he was directly involved in the canonization of St. Arsenios the Cappadocian, who was the priest who baptized him when he was a little baby, St. Paisios. And St. Paisios would describe directly to some of these nuns that he was guiding. They had an iconographer in the monastery, this female nun, and he said to her, this is what he looks like. I think one time she painted, he said, no, it's not right. And he tried to correct her. And St. Paisios says that, oftentimes a lot of the iconographers that are more spiritual, their icons will come out very accurately. He also says that some of the wonder-working icons that have happened because the iconographer who painted them was incredibly pious, incredibly holy. Sometimes there's even flaws. He talks about one of the most famous icons in Mount Athos, I forget which one because there's many, but it's very powerful, very wonder-working. He said, if you actually look at that icon, it has flaws in it. It's not actually, it doesn't even, it is iconographically imperfect. There's some things that he did that weren't quite right. However, he must have been something. This icon became really, really holy. If you go and you look at some of the old iconographers from the Middle Ages, from Russia and from Byzantium, some of them are so powerful. When you look at the faces are so powerful. It's like you can find icons of Elijah the prophet that are so powerful, as in his face radiates so much power, so much emotion. And this is why I think in the East we never went with statues, because I think the medium of statues cannot produce the amount of emotion, the amount of power that the two-dimensional icons actually can. There's the other reasons, the idolatry. I think in the East there was just so many huge statues that people in the East had a phobia of statues. They kind of said, this is too much like the pagan times. It's too much like the idols.
Can't depict as much.
So in a certain sense, I don't know. I've seen many statues. I've never seen any of them meet the same power as many of the icons that I have seen. In which I've seen icons that are so beautiful, so well depicted, so deep in their power, and they radiate so much.
They have icons in their stained glass. Some of those are pretty. And I think the East, they got that from the East. And the stained glass
actually might be a Western thing.
I thought they started in the East with illumination, and then they just kind of went on that. Because I think some of the early ones when they depicted would illuminate they're like marble or illuminate. I remember reading a long time ago. I do got a quick question. I think Devin was telling me this, I think he said one time is Christ, or maybe you did, is Christ doesn't ever have glare on his eyes because he is the light?
No saints do.
Yeah.
No saints do. So this is one of the different things, is that no saints ever shine. Their eyes will never shine. Because a shining eye means light from the outside is reflecting off of my eye, and you're seeing it. When we depict the saints, the angels, obviously Christ, the light that's illuminating them is heavenly light. So the halo is an expression of light coming out of them. Because Christ is in them. The Holy Spirit is in them. God is living in them. So a person who's a saint is someone in whom God lives and dwells and has made his home. And so therefore, the light that is in that saint is reflecting out. The other thing I'll tell you is that every single icon is an icon of Christ. Because every single saint is someone who's been conformed to Christ. Man, woman, it doesn't matter. So every icon is an icon of Christ, essentially. That's what they all are. They are a person that the Holy Spirit has refashioned into Christ. So Christ is essentially throughout the whole church. Because every saint has been someone who's become like Christ by the power of the Holy Spirit.
Something like the icons that St. Andrei Rublev painted, or just in general, when icons are somewhere on the East Coast here, there's this giant museum of Russian art, and there's an entire like halls and halls of icons, old icons that this rich guy has collected over the years. Does this like inhibit any grace from the way, like irreverent way that it's treated? Because I know the Holy Trinity icon that St. Andrei Rublev painted wrote is in a museum. It's in a museum somewhere.
It is,
now.
yes, in the Tretyakov Gallery. It's in one of Moscow's most famous art museums, but I'm not sure that it's there because, to be impious, I think that icon is so important that I think it's kept safely there, essentially. I think that it's kept there as...
Makes sense.
But it also probably was put there by the communists.
Yeah.
And so the communists actually themselves did value certain icons, not for spiritual reasons, but because they were historical or cultural items of great significance. And so the communists would take some of these. Of course, I mean, the communists were proud of Russia's cultural history, right? And so they wanted
to let that movie
be
made.
They wanted foreigners to come and to look at these things and to, pay money for that or whatever. And so what I will say is that I don't think that's a good thing. It's not a good thing that you have all these art collectors gathering icons. This is a terrible thing. There's a huge black market in the old world. It doesn't matter which country. It's everywhere where you have guys stealing icons and selling them on the black market to art dealers who want money, and so or have money and are willing to pay. Icons are being treated as art. It would not surprise me at all to go into Bill Gates' house and find some amazing, 17th century icon that he doesn't even believe in, but he has it there as a set piece on his wall. How horrifying is that? It's massively horrifying, but that is actually what has happened. Due to communism, due to criminality, due to unbelief, due to war, the Nazis would capture icons in Russian, and some of them may have been Catholic soldiers who said, well, this is going to be destroyed. I actually venerate this, and some of them have been returned. And so the truth is that icons have found their way all throughout the world, and some of them may have actually done good, being carried away to different places and bringing about blessed things. But yeah, it's not a good thing that they're in museums. That's not a good thing. They should be taken to churches and kept there. Honestly, icons are holy. They're not decorations. One time I was watching a Russian iconographer who was very, 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 very pious man, and he was being interviewed by some secular person who didn't understand anything, and I forget what the secular person said, but the way the Russian guy responded was really intense. And he's a Russian guy living in America, though. He lives in America, and he paints in America. And he basically says that the icon is written, is painted, is written. We use the word written. The icon is written not for you to look at it, but for it to look at you. As in, the icon reads you. When you go and face an icon, the icon is gazing at you, because that will affect you. And so the icon is literally a manifestation of power. It's not something that we look at on a wall to gain inspiration from, though you may gain that by gazing at an icon. It's really to make you realize you're in the presence of God, and you need to remember this. And you should be. So, like in old Tsarist Russia, if you were brought to court, you wouldn't swear on the Bible. You would actually make an oath in front of an icon. They would hold up an icon, and you would make an oath in front of it. That's what they would do. I mean, maybe the cross too. That's fine. But oftentimes it would be an icon, because it was considered that only a horrible person would lie in front of an icon.
Does it go down to faith again, where
even
in a secular place?
Icons, icons always have power. They always do.
I mean, like someone in a secular place with these icons, like they could faithfully venerate them.
Oh yeah,
even
of course. Well, why would that change? An icon is an icon no matter where it is.
Yeah.
And so the problem is, if you go to Bill Gates' house and he has an icon there, it's like that doesn't change what it is.
Yeah.
Bill Gates might have it, but it doesn't alter the reality of what it is.
Yeah.
It's like a cross. Does the cross become something different when it's taken somewhere? No, it doesn't, right?
Someone reverently wears it.
Well, if someone irreverently wears it, they deny the power of it, and they're living in contravenience to it.
Yeah.
That doesn't hurt you if you have faith.
Yeah.
it doesn't harm you at all. Any more questions?
Yeah.
Sorry, do you remember your question by this point?
Yeah. I've been thinking about it for like 10 minutes. So
now that you're done, let's talk.
Yeah. So I want to take it back to crosses. So
okay. Okay, very good.
So I know that earlier we were talking about that Crusader cross.
Yes.
Yes. It originates in some other place or whatever.
Yeah.
So do different styles or types of crosses have very slightly different meanings?
the cross always connects to Christ. It always connects.
Well,
with us.
yeah.
But there may have been reasons why they were created. Like the Crusader cross put Jerusalem in the center and these 4 Crusader nations around it to represent that Jerusalem is the target of these. I mean, it's the goal of these 4 nations that want to capture it for the sake of what they want. Do you know what I mean? So there was reasons why that cross had meaning behind it. And so yes, many crosses carry with it some kind of, I mean, there's so many variations. Many of them have a particular meaning for which they were made. Of course, all of them connect to Christ. That's the entire point of it.
Is there any like interesting backstory about like the Celtic cross, like with the circle around the?
That could actually be God. I mean, the circle is a divine symbol because the circle has no beginning and it has no end. Right? Where does the circle start? It doesn't. Where does the circle end? It doesn't. Right?
There's this interesting cross that I saw on Legacy Icons.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Cross
of Antioch.
Yeah.
It's really cool, but
I think that the cross of Antioch is this cross. The circle, I don't know if the circle is the cross of Antioch. I think that is like the Celtic edition.
Okay.
I got a controversial cross to ask about.
Can I see it?
The swastika. It's been used in the East, and it's still in the garments. I don't know. It's
right.
found all over the world.
So the swastika.
It's flipped.
Yeah, I think it's a
mirrored.
pre-flood. I think it's a pre-flood symbol. It's also the yin yang symbol, the Zen. It's the pre. In every culture, they have that.
I've never heard about that before, but
The swastika, yes. The swastika.
It's all over the world.
What you see if you're seeing the swastika in Byzantine art, what it typically is that you have a whole series of patterns.
Yeah.
And it's like a meeting point of the different patterns that meet, right? And so it's sort of like a reflection of this reality.
Research this out, and it's like the symbols all over the world. The Hopi Indians used it.
Yeah.
Prior to, all the Japanese, the Chinese, the Europeans, they found the symbol of the world. I suspect it was a pre-flood symbol, but
It very well could be because it is used throughout the world. It was used by tribes in Europe. In fact, in World War I, you'll see many German pilots painted the swastika on their planes as a good luck charm, as a good luck symbol. It had nothing to do with Nazism.
Oh, I know.
Later, of course, it was adopted by the Nazis, but the Nazis also adopted a very particular form of it that was tilted at the 45-degree angle, because the swastika is oftentimes not depicted at this angle.
Yeah.
They depicted it at this angle. That's how they wanted it to be shown, and that was their official symbol, was the angled, swastika. But if you go to Japan, if you go to Vietnam, you go to Thailand, you go to all these places, you go to India.
Yeah, apparently the
swastika is everywhere. Yeah. I think I've seen mostly where I've seen the swastika in Christian art has mostly been in motifs where you have a whole series of running patterns, and you actually will have them. The patterns will meet at this point, which you have a swastika symbol where you'll have this meeting of these things that will meet.
Yeah.
So you might have a vestment, or you might have it might be a decorative wall motif where you'll have this meeting point where you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Where it will cross and it will go. And I've seen that. I've actually seen this. I've seen this myself. Yeah.
So one anthropologist that covers that, I read a lot of history, watch a lot of history, but it was from one point of view, and it seems to be kind of a thing nobody wants to talk about. But obviously it was a different meaning before World War II, and then it kind of got blotted out. I just thought maybe you might knew some.
I don't know, actually. For the Asians, there's no negative connotation to it. They have no negative connotation. I think they're actually really sad that the rest of the world has a negative view of it.
Yeah.
That bothers them a lot, actually, because for them it's a symbol that has no reference to.
I think even there's that Methodist church, that really tall one that's got all the symbols on it, like on Olive Street. I think there might be a swastika over there too. So don't quote me on that.
I would wonder. That's not a symbol that we can't depict that symbol.
Is there any inherent difference between like having it an actual carved like wooden or metal or just whatever cross, and then you have an icon of a cross? Is there
good question? Really good question.
One that's better over another, or one that you would like recommend over another? Just for reference, there's cross icon that I think is really cool.
Yeah. Oh, I don't know. This is actually monastic. This is what a great schema monk actually would.
Oh, it's the schema monk.
This is part of like a schema. You know what I mean?
Yeah. My question still stands though with just any icon of a cross, just in general. It doesn't have to be that one, but.
My opinion is that I would if it was me, I would get a wooden. If you want to have a wall cross on your wall, I would get a cross that you can hang on your wall.
Yeah.
An actual cross, an actual wooden cross. There are icons of crosses, and this, I'm not sure that this matters. The cross and the gospel are the two most powerful icons we have of Christ. The gospel is literally his life. The cross is literally his death. The reason I would advise people to get an actual physical cross is not because the icons that depict crosses don't depict true holiness and reality, but because the cross is such a distinct icon. It's an icon of itself. It's a power of all by itself. It's something very, 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 very unique. That's why I suggest you get an actual cross and not merely an icon of a cross. There are icons, for example, of Christ being nailed to the cross. There's iconographic scenes of Christ being hung on the cross. There's icons of him being tortured, actually. There's a whole series of icons. But the cross itself is something very special.
I swear to God, I asked Bishop Maximus years ago to bless a cross, and he said they already had a blessing in themselves. I thought that's what he said, that a cross automatic. But I was wondering if he still blessed it, but I thought that was interesting. Yeah.
This goes back to an interesting question, like, should we bless icons or not? You know, the common custom within the Orthodox world is currently that if you have an icon, you bring it to a priest and he puts it on the altar, serves divine liturgy, and brings it back to you. In the ancient times, they would never bless icons or crosses because the depiction of a saint inherently is holy. When you depict a saint, it becomes holy. When you have a cross, taking two pieces of wood, cross them together with faith, you immediately have, like that Muslim guy we're talking about. Right? He's not even Christian, he's not even baptized. And yet this cross he's wearing around his neck that he fashioned is driving away demons because of the virtue of what it is. So if we make a cross in faith, what more blessing can we add? We've already formed Christ's cross. However you want to make it, whether you make it out of metal, make it out of gold, make it out of wood, it doesn't matter what you make it out of. But you take this and you form it with faith. Can we add anything to that? No, it's already tapped into the cross. The reason why we bless things is an interesting question. Some people think that this is really, really bad, this practice of blessing icons. Some people really don't like it. In the modern world that we live in, images are a dime a dozen. We throw away images all the time. Who cares about images? We have a magazine with 1 million images in it. We have all these things everywhere. The blessing of icons is not so much saying that with the altar we can add to the holiness of a saint, but it makes you more serious about what I give you, what I give back to you. You know what I'm saying? So if I bless an icon on the altar and I give it back to someone, they are like, oh, this is holy. He just took it off the altar. Like, I should treat this with reverence. Yeah, you should always have treated it with reverence. And so there's a sense in which the blessing on the altar doesn't necessarily contradict the teachings of the church. It helps the people pastorally realize how important this is. That's probably why in the old times many people give their marital vows before the altar. In the East, we don't do that. Why? Because the vows I would give for the woman, I give to her father when I go to get her. Right? I go to her dad and I say, I want to marry your daughter. The dad says, really? Let's talk. You really want to marry my daughter? Okay, then let's do this, this, and this. You better promise you're going to do this and this. And you say, I swear, I promise you that I'll keep your daughter. I promise you, even if she gets sick, I won't abandon her. I promise you. Now, people were violating promises, and so they were doing all these things. And so, probably in the West, a tradition came where they would make them give vows before the altar. So they would be full of fear, and they would actually keep these promises. They would actually keep them because they would be reverent. So the blessing of icons is an interesting thing, because actually some people say the ecumenical councils actually forbid this practice. But at the same time, as a priest in the world that we live in, I think it's a good practice because it helps the people understand the gravity of what they're getting, of what they're holding, of what they're doing. It's very important.
Yeah, because originally someone wrote the icon. Mm-hmm. Nowadays, most of our icons, they're copies that are put on wood.
That's absolutely true, but that doesn't change the significance of what they are. Yeah. And so even if you copy an image, even if you take, I'm sorry to say this, but I hate church bulletins that have icons on them. That's sacrilege. So a friend of mine.
Church bulletins?
Yeah, like church bulletins.
Something like that? Like a bulletin board over there?
No, not a bulletin board. Like the church bulletins, like handouts. Like you go to a church. Like bulletins where you go to a church and it's like, I'll be honest with you, I don't like bulletins because oftentimes people are tempted to make the bulletins really nice, and by doing that they put crosses on them. They put icons on them, and then what happens? They throw them in the trash. We actually live in an age that's worse than the time of the iconoclasts. The iconoclasts feared icons so much that they destroyed them. They were so terrified of icons they would destroy them. This right here is really pretty, but it has problems. A gift card is for what? It's for you to look at for a short time and then throw it away. You cannot throw this in the garbage can. So this friend of mine that I knew, he told me that one time he was in church with a friend of his, and his friend had to spit, so he spat in the trash can. Someone had put a bulletin into the trash can, he spat on the face of Christ. He committed, it wasn't his fault. He put his spittle where it should go. That's in the trash can. The question is, why did someone put Christ into the trash can? That's a great question. See, modern people are crazy. They don't understand anything. I'm sorry, they don't. I'll give you an example. We have these trinkets in the church that I look at and say, my goodness, why do we have this? So
buttons and stuff?
Yeah, there's buttons, but forgive me, I'm trying to look for what I want to find is these bracelets that you'll see people have. Or they will have
with the icons on it?
Yeah, they'll have these bracelets with icons on them, and it's okay, I'm going to go to the bathroom and then, wipe myself with the icons. I'm sorry, but that's horrible. But you have people who I want to be pious and put icons on my shirt. And then you're going to wash it with your underwear? I'm sorry, this is actually corrupt. An icon is holy.
Yeah, I really like that ministry Death to the World, but they have shirts with,
They have some.
Father
See, that's what I mean. They do stuff that's they don't do this on purpose. They don't think about this. The commercialization of images has grown so intense that modern people treat icons like they treat every other image. That's why blessing them on the altar is not such a bad thing to do. Because you have some of these theologians say this is impure. Why are you blessing icons? This is actually this is theologically wrong. This is error. I'm thinking, okay, I understand why you're saying that, but the problem is I'm also a pastor dealing with people who don't actually have any faith in images. They don't venerate them. They don't understand what they are. They could treat this like they treat a used cars magazine, and I need to show them that's not true. Sometimes the church does pastoral things that actually aren't rooted necessarily in the original theology they're given. They do this because they have to correct problems with people. And so sometimes this leads to serious problems, and sometimes it leads to goodness. And that's the thing you have to be careful of. That's why church practices are highly complex. Why do some rituals exist? Why do they come into existence? You have to understand there's a lot of reasons why they do. And not all of them are good sometimes. And not all of them are bad either. You know? And so some of these theologians will say, blessing a cross makes no sense. What the bishop said is totally right. If we form a cross, what more blessing do we need to add to this? It's like if we have a gospel book, right? Let's say we have a gospel book. The gospel book has the words of our Lord Jesus in it already. His words, his holy words, and the description of his life. What more can I do to make this more holy than it already is? It's holy by the virtue of it being his words. His words have made it holy. Now, we can cover it with gold and put an icon of the resurrection on the front of it and a cross on it to help people see it better, to see what it is better. I mean, the gold will make them more reverent. That's absolutely true. So there are some. The Russians have services for blessing all kinds of things. They have services for blessing like gospel books. They have a service for blessing a pectoral cross. They have services for all these things. And I'm not
space stations.
What was that?
What? Just like missiles and like space stations and all types of stuff.
Thanks.
Well, yeah, no, that's different. That's different. These are objects of utility that we're blessing as does protection on a tank, on a plane, on a boat. That's different. I'm talking about, can we make a holy thing more holy? Or is it not holy until we bless it? What makes it holy? When does it become holy? At what moment is a gospel book holy? I'm going to tell you the truth. The moment it was printed, it became holy. The moment Christ's words were put into it, it was holy. So there are some heretical books that we should not throw away, we should burn. Not because we like the heresy or respect it, but because Christ's words are in there. You know, even the Quran might actually have Christ's name in it. Should we urinate and defecate all over that? No. It may have Christ. It doesn't mean we're agreeing with all the stuff that's in there. It's garbage. It's the insanity of Muhammad. Muhammad was an absolutely possessed, degenerate man. But should we disrespect Christ? No. Like, so even some of the heretical books the Holy Fathers would deal with, they burn these books because they say, look, it's total heresy. We've got to get rid of it. But it has scripture in it. It has Christ in it. There's all these quotations from the Bible. Should we mistreat this? No. That part of it is God. I mean, it's of God. We should treat it with. We should show reverence to it. And so that's what we have to say. So the bishop didn't say anything wrong. But at the same time, the parallel view of blessing things also isn't wrong. Because, what my godfather would say, he was this pious Russian man, he would say, if you buy something, you should bless it. Because people are transactional. They think, hey, I bought this, it's just a thing. No, yeah, you may have paid money for it, but that doesn't mean that it's not holy. But the problem is, sometimes people get into their heads that they bought this at a store, it must not be that holy, or it won't become holy until I bless it. And so I think this practice of blessing it's like you have these two parallel truths. Are they both wrong? No, they could both be right. The bishop would be completely right in what he says, and I think he is. But I also don't think blessing it is wrong either. I think blessing is also right for pastoral reasons, not necessarily for theological reasons, pastoral reasons.
For example, you do a house blessing, and you bless the icons, the icon corner. Does that work in itself?
No, that doesn't make them. That doesn't. I mean, the blessing is more for your home. The icon is the sanctified part of your home.
I mean, they're already holy, of course.
We want the rest of your house to become holy.
Okay.
We want the rest of your house to become better.
Okay,
I may sprinkle holy water everywhere, and some of it might land on the icons, but I'm actually trying to bless the profane parts of your house.
Yeah. I was just wondering if that was counts as a blessing of the icons too, or just.
The service. I think the real service of blessing icons occurred to be done publicly by priests in front of people to reinforce in people's minds the real power of images and what they actually mean, and that you should show great fear to them. That's actually why these services of blessing were created. So even when I put an icon on the altar, that's not the service of blessing. The real service of blessing would be prayers the priest would read, and he would literally take holy water, and he would read prayers over the images, and he would sprinkle them with holy water, and then he would give them to the owners of the images. That's actually how the real blessing service goes. The Rosh Hashanah blessing services for everything, for investments, for everything. And I think our bishop also doesn't fully agree with that. I don't know. I would almost feel like our bishop would almost say you should wear the vestment and serve in it, and that's its blessing. I think that's almost how he would say.
Does our bishop speak English?
Yeah, he speaks English really, really well. He speaks French.
Several
he speaks
languages.
Greek, he speaks
He's got a
Canadian,
PhD.
Russian too.
Now you have to be higher
To be
education.
bishop now, you probably have to have a PhD.
Yeah.
You probably have to be a PhD now.
Because in the old day, you had to memorize both the Gospels and the Book of Psalms, right?
Yeah, in the old days, yeah, you had to have real knowledge. You needed to have that kind of knowledge.
Well, what about we venerate the gospel, but what if we have our Bible?
Yeah.
What if we have a separate gospel? Or we have the Bible, how do we treat it? Do we venerate that at home?
Oh no, there's nothing wrong with venerating the Bible. The Bible's holy. So I mean, like for example, like on the LBSU, like oftentimes when I read my Bible, when I read the scriptures with my wife, I would, like let's say we read some scripture, I'd venerate the scripture and offer her to it. You see, the priest always venerates the gospel after he reads it. The deacon, the deacon probably could. He doesn't. But every time the priest venerates, every time I read the gospel, I will end it.
I see Deacon Stephen's doing that.
I will end it by kissing the gospel. He probably does.
Yeah, but
He doesn't bless with it.
I see whenever you hand it to him, he always kisses it.
Oh, he kisses. No, forgive me. He always kisses the front of the gospel. I don't know if he kisses the page that he reads.
Oh, yeah.
See, the priest will actually kiss even the words of Christ. So after I finish reading the gospel, I'll actually bend and kiss the very passage I just read, showing my reverence for what I just kissed, and then I'll hold up the gospel, bless the people with it, close it, and put it back on the altar. You can also venerate your Bible as well, right? The Bible is holy. This even has a cross on it, so you can kiss that.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm going to sound like a Protestant. It'd be great to be thumping people over the head with that, huh?
So is it possible to commit idolatry to the Bible?
Is it possible to commit idolatry to the Bible? Well,
Put it
sure.
with God, yeah.
Sure. I mean, if you worship ink and paper, yes. If you kiss the Bible, you're venerating it. So you're showing reverence to what Christ has written. You know what I mean?
Okay.
If you
I think some Protestants put the Bible above Christ.
very possibly they can. Yes. Okay. So iconoclasm. We can go very soon. I'll say a few things though. There were abuses. Iconoclasm was a massive sin. In fact, so our church actually takes a very harsh position. We actually say if you do not venerate icons, anathema to you. You're under a curse if you don't actually venerate icons. It's not that icons are okay to venerate. We don't say that. We say you venerate this or you are accursed. Anyone who will not kiss the image of Christ is under a curse, anathema to you. That means you are headed for destruction. Because if the image of Christ depicts his incarnate reality, so for example, if a man comes to me and says, I believe, do you believe in the incarnation? Yeah, I do. Prove it then. Show me. Yeah, show me. Get on your knees in front of this image and bow to it and show me. Well, he won't do this? Okay, anathema to you. You don't actually believe in the incarnation, anathema to you.
But yeah, that's pretty much exactly what my stepsister would tell me. Is that if my stepsister, her name's April, I love her very much. She is very iconoclast. I mean,
so you don't need to tell her anathema. You don't need to say that. But all I'm saying is that the church doesn't have this view of this neutral view. We don't have a neutral view. Our view is actually positive. Our view is that you need to venerate. You actually need to. And the longer you're Orthodox, the more you'll understand why you must do this. You must do it. It's not something you can do. You must do it. With the gospel, yeah, people must venerate the gospel. They must bow to it and venerate it. But I'll give you an example of some iconoclastic things that happened. There were people who used to have an icon as their godparent. Because, hey, the Archangel Michael is here in his icon. He's my godparent. He's my godfather. So they would replace their godparent with an icon. There were some guys who would have an old icon that the paint would be beginning to flake off. They would put it into the Holy Chalice to add it to Holy Communion. They would do absurdities like this. Were these practices evil? Yes. Should the people who did them be punished? Yes. Did that justify iconoclasm? No, it didn't. So the fact that you had weird people that were doing weird things that were actually totally incorrect, totally wrong, probably idolatrous, it does not mean that iconoclasm was correct. And so what I'm going to tell you is that there were people who perpetrated some abuses. There were some problems. But those problems did not change what icons were or how holy they were or what they meant. But they were abused by these people. But the answer was not to get rid of icons. And it was the right answer was not to show irreverence to them. The answer was to do what was correct. Could you treat the Bible idolatrously? Yes, you could. Could you treat an icon idolatrously? Yes, if you forgot what the icon was, and you began to worship the thing as if this thing itself. That's what I meant before when I said an icon is more like a window. When you come in contact with an icon, you're seeking actually not paint or wood or gold, but you're seeking the one who's depicted. But that person who's depicted is in heaven, but at the same time everywhere. But if you actually say, no, this thing is what I'm actually looking for. But like I said, the last time, A mom who has a son in the Marine Corps who kisses his image doesn't say, "Oh, I don't care about my son, but I love kissing this photo paper." It's like, you know what I'm saying? Like, there's a difference. Like, if she says, "I don't care about my son, he could die for all I care, but photo paper is what I like." This is where she's become. I mean, I'm not sure what the right word is. She's gotten rid of her child and has embraced photo paper instead. But see, her kissing, she could even kiss the photo paper with absolute love. She could cry over it. Her tears could fall into it. But it has nothing to do with photo paper. It's the son who's depicted on it. That's what matters. And so when Protestants come to the church, they have to undo a lot of things, because for them, images are associated with idolatry. Like, especially bowing to an image seems to them to be completely idolatrous, and it's very hard for them to. They have to move their mind out of that condition to another position. I had to do this when I was a Protestant. I had to do that. I actually had to go through that entire process. But the more you do this, the more you think about it, the more you realize actually that this is not what you're doing at all. Because if you fall down before an image of Christ, you're doing this for him. This particular image is not what you're worshiping at all. And yet it's a depiction of him, so you show great reverence to it. But the worship you have is directed to him. It's never directed to any kind of material thing. Because otherwise we become worshippers of all kinds of material things. But none of that would be salvific. It cannot be. But at the same time, if we don't depict Christ, then he just becomes an idea. He's just an abstraction. He's just a part of my philosophy. But Christ is this philosophical thing somewhere. And I think about him sometimes. But no, Christ is a man. He's a physical man. He was seen, he was heard, he was touched. Christianity is not a philosophy. It's the revelation of the living God. That's what it is. It's not just another thought process. But if we don't have icons, then our religion will become something that is disincarnate. It will become a kind of abstraction. That is also terrible. You cannot do this. God is seen. God is touched. God is depicted. We always have to remember this.
Well, how do you see your sister just hold up one of the icons and go, "This is all you need. This is all you need." Just do that to her,
Or you could have an icon. You could say, "What about the illiterate people? How are they gonna? How will they understand anything? The illiterate people,
That's actually a really back before I even started inquiring into orthodoxy. That was something that I actually thought was a super good point. Was when someone told me well, for the vast majority of history, a lot of people couldn't even read. So this was their reading, was this icon, this is how they saw the gospel.
Yeah.
This is literally how they read it. And I was like, oh, well.
The other problem, as I've said before, is where's paradise, right? The problem is, I talked to, when I was a Protestant, I thought God was in some, he's up here somewhere. It's where's God? Where's heaven? Where is all this stuff? The problem is, as an Orthodox person, what I would say to you is that God is everywhere. God is all around us. God, we are floating in the midst of God's power. God is everywhere. The saints are everywhere. This idea that heaven is this kind of locality. It's distant locality. This is a very bad way to think, because it almost seems like God is distant. No, he's not distant. He's everywhere. He's everywhere present. He fills all things. The nearest icon is the nearest portal to heaven. It's everywhere, and it makes you realize that heaven is close. It's not far. It's close to you. It's near to you. It's at the very door. It's at your very heart. It's everywhere. And so I think the problem when I was a Protestant, I just never had this vision that heaven was all around me. As an Orthodox person, I say absolutely, it's everywhere present. And this is why the church is fresco, right? When you go step into the church, heaven is everywhere. Heaven is all around you. All these saints are present, because that's truly how it is. The icons actually show us what is true. Every time the divine liturgy is heard, heaven itself descends and surrounds us. And so therefore, why would we want a bare church? We would want a church that depicts what is real. What is real is that the saints really are here. Right? Not a bare church with, again, if we have a bombed out building, that's all we have, okay, fine. But that's not ideal. We want a church that depicts all these things, because everywhere we look, we want people to see the image of Christ in the saints and all these things. And we want their heart to be continually uplifted at every moment. That's what's necessary.
One thing that I always thought was kind of ironic was when the more iconoclast Protestants will always say oh, you can't make any image about God at all.
Except on Christmas.
That's exactly what I was about to say. Except for Christmas, when you can make
then you
an
can do
image
it,
of
yeah. Then you
totally
can be Catholic at that point.
Yeah. I've always thought that was really weird and funny.
The one thing the iconoclasts would never stop, though, is the cross. They venerated the cross. They would bow down, just as we bow down before now. They would also bow down before it. The iconoclasts never got rid of the cross. They would bow down before it. They would kiss it. They would venerate it.
Well, at least they got that going for them.
That's one thing they did do. And the Protestants, the many Protestants would not even do that. They would not kiss the cross. They wouldn't venerate it the way we do.
It's funny, a lot of them do altar calls, so you're kind of bowing to an altar, I never figured out that. Or slaying in the spirits, speaking in tongues.
Yeah, that's a totally different.
Yeah.
When you have an icon that's out of reach, and you can't kiss I've seen people...
Find a ladder. Find a ladder.
Kiss your hand and touch it. How do you venerate that icon?
People can. You can do that. There's
okay.
so if an icon, You see these like little old ladies like going to churches with the icons like on the ceiling and they'll like blow kisses to it, you know. That's fine. I mean, if you cannot kiss the icon with your lips, you can certainly kiss your hand and touch it.
Okay.
You can certainly do that. That's fine.
If we were moving them around, do we
Yeah.
treat it? We venerate it beforehand, kiss
Absolutely.
it, and then move the icon.
Just realize, I mean, what you should really think if you're touching icons is you're touching Christ. And so, how would you touch
Okay.
Christ? How would you move him?
Okay.
Like, if you drop an icon, then you should say, "Oh Lord, forgive me." Do a prostration. Say, "Oh Lord, I'm sorry, forgive me." But what I'm saying is that this is His image. An icon is a mysterious reality because the closeness between Christ and His image is profound. But is that Christ? Holy Communion is different. That's not an icon.
Mm-hmm.
Holy Communion is Christ Himself. That's why people will fall down and worship before the Holy Mysteries, because that is Christ. It's not an icon. It's not an image of Him. That is Him. Him under covers of image of things. Because if we were to see flesh sitting on the paten, what would we do? Right? We might not be able to bear that. If the chalice was completely full of blood, the priest would run out of the altar and probably would not know what to do. Would he drink it? Would he drink blood? He might not be able to. That would be very hard. And so therefore, when everything is present as wine and bread, then I mean, think about it. Would any priest would he have the guts to hack up the flesh of Christ if it was sitting on the paten? We have to break it up and put it into the chalice. How would I do that? Would I be able to? Would I be able to take the bloody flesh of Christ and tear it to pieces and put it into the chalice? No. But if it's bread, then I can. If it's seen as bread, then I can. The Eucharist is not an icon. Everything else is. So therefore, but at the same time, when you're touching the images of God, realize that the icon is a medium by which you touch God, by which you touch Christ. And so that's why you show massive reverence. But the icon is also the very presence of who is depicted. It's like if you say that God is everywhere present, the icon makes that present to you. It makes your eyes able to see this presence. We know God is everywhere, but as soon as you see an icon of Christ, you say, I see His presence. It makes visible the invisible presence, is the best way of putting it. If heaven is all around us, icons make visible heaven. Oh, we see heaven now. Absolutely. And so be tremendously fearful when you touch icons. You should touch icons with absolute fear. When I first, oh my goodness, I've become so corrupt. When I became Orthodox, I had such faith in icons. I had such, every time a new icon was given to me, I would bring it into my home. I would feel a new power had entered my house. I felt like some other person had come to my home. It was very, 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 very intense. When I first would receive icons, I would never touch the face of them. I didn't know, I had so much reverence, I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to touch them. So I would hold them in this way that I would never put my hands over the front of them. And I would venerate them because I just didn't think, anything should touch an icon but my lips. But the problem is, as a priest, I'm touching things all the time. And so I become desensitized to how holy things are because I'm always working with them and I'm always doing things with them. Just like craftsmen become desensitized to some of the work that they do because, maybe it's like a man works with paint. Maybe the first time the fumes of the paint are so intense that it's hard for him, but he gets used to it and pretty soon he doesn't care. He doesn't even remember that there are fumes because he works with it all the time. This is the danger of working with holy things, is that you can very easily become desensitized to what you're doing because you're doing it all the time. You have to do it all the time. When I first entered the altar as an acolyte, I thought I was entering heaven. Oh my goodness, I felt all this power. I felt like an onrush of grace and power and all these things. But as a priest, now what happens? I enter the altar all the time. I'm always in the altar, coming in and out. And I'm not a saint. If I was a saint, I would feel this power all the time in a very intangible way. Because I'm a sinful, corrupt man, I become desensitized to it. And it's actually quite sad. But because God gave me all the blessings of originally knowing those things by feeling when I first went to the altar and also feeling icons and knowing what they were like, it helps me to, in my path of repentance, to go back to that reality, to constantly go back to it. But icons are something fearsome. People should be very afraid of them, and they should treat them with great reverence. And they should reverence them mightily, because miracles happen from them all the time. Power happens to them all the time. They do, wonders happen all the time. Have great reverence for icons.
Okay.
And for the cross, and for the cross, and for the cross. It is really meet to call thee blessed, Theotokos, the ever blessed and all immaculate and Mother of our God, more honorable than the cherubim, and beyond compare more glorious than the seraphim. Thee, who without corruption, gavest birth to God the Word. The very Theotokos, thee do we magnify. Glory to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, both now and ever, and unto the ages of ages. Amen. Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy.
Father.
God is with us by His grace and love for mankind, always now and ever, and unto the ages of ages. Amen.